Hey, lovely people. We're going to be talking to Emma from the Kitchen Garden, which is a community-supported agricultural scheme down in the Cotswolds. Want to talk a little bit about how to make vegetables more accessible to our local communities and more affordable. But I thought I'd just pop on, a minute earlier, and because I think it's the British Farming Fortnight, and one of my real passions is to help people connect to food producers and growers in our own country, and how they can have direct access to really amazing food. Here in the UK, sort of 80% of our food comes through 8 major supermarkets, and with all of the issues around logistics of getting food to supermarkets, we're seeing some empty shelves and maybe even the threat of not being able to get our turkey at Christmas. And I think now is the time to be really transitioning to finding food producers in our areas. Not only does this support our economy, in the National Food Strategy, I saw an amazing statistic where it talked about how for every £10 that you might invest in, say, a farm shop or a local food producer, you put £25 back into that local economy, where if you gave that same £10 to the supermarket, you only invest £2.40 back into the local economy. So I think food does an amazing thing. Let me just tap onto Emma so that she can join us. So I think food is this amazing thing where we can nurture our economy, we can nurture our health, we can nurture our communities. And this week I'm going to be interviewing different producers around the country, so that you can make that decision about investing in your health and in your local community. Hi, Emma.
Hi. It doesn't get much more farm to fork, actually, and farm to I've just come off, literally just opened the door now. I'm stuck behind a big tractor. I won't tell you what language I used.
Well, don't worry. I was just having a chat and just explaining about what I'm doing this week, about trying to connect with local producers and how, I just think as we do that, we not only invest in our economy and our communities, but we're investing in our health. And again, just to recap, if those that don't know me, I mean, my major health messages when it comes to recovering health is just eat real food. And let's not get too caught up about where that protein's coming from, what nutrition camp we sit in. Really, it is about accessing real food. And that can be a real challenge for a lot of people in terms of having access to food like that, but also the affordability of it. And this is something I want to pick up with you, because I'm just so excited to be seeing what you're doing. And we'll hear about it in a moment. And also, I think, from a health perspective, it's very, very clear with the research that we need a plant slant to our diet. And eating that rainbow, and if you look at your plate, 70% of it should be from some sort of plant, is going to be really beneficial to our health. And then I think also, the more I get into this, the more I realise that where our food comes from is really important, especially with fruit and veg. How far it's travelled, impacts the nutritional value. When it's harvested, impacts that value too. And then in terms of the chemicals that are used to produce our food, also impacting the nutritional value, but also having a direct impact on our own health. So that's why I'm so passionate about getting people connecting with local food producers, getting back to real food, getting back to that plant slant, finding producers who aren't using all of these intensive chemicals to produce food. Plus, it just tastes great as well. So Emma, welcome. Just tell me a little bit about you and your project that you're on with. And like, I had never heard of the term CSA, so I imagine there's people there that don't know what that is, and how do they, connect with local CSAs in the nation.
Well, it's quite exciting now, actually, because I think when we started back in 2016, in our local area at least, I don't think I met anyone who knew what CSA was.
Yeah.
But now I'm seeing them like popping up all over the place on the map, really big in the States, really big in the rest of Europe, actually, sort of France and Germany, plenty of CSAs. But basically what it means is a way of growing and producing where you're, as customers, you're sharing the risk with the farmers.
Okay.
So lots of different kind of models within the CSA movement. It stands for community supported agriculture.
Yeah.
And in our case, the support that our community gives us, along with plenty of other kinds of support, but the main bit of the support is the fact that they pay a fixed amount of £30 a month for a variable amount of produce every week. So we grow enough for the amount of, and I basically choose the customers that we've got and the number that we've got in June, and they buy with us and pay that fixed amount every month for the whole entire growing season, for the whole year. So June to June, I know exactly who my customers are.
And what are you growing? Like, just set the scene. You're based in one of my favourite places in the world, you know, Farm Ed, which is a sort of an education place for regenerative farming. It's totally inspiring if you can ever get to go there. And seeing your project grow has just been a delight over the last, well, it's only the last, you know, two years, is it?
I've been at Farm Ed since 2018, so not very started off really small, actually, which I hope, if there's anyone listening who's not just interested in kind of good quality nutritious food, but also loves growing a few things on their windowsill and might branch out, we started growing on 1/5 of an acre in the same village I live in here in Chadlington. And then I spent a couple of years, I would say 2 years, nagging local farmers for extra land to expand onto. And then I ended up completely lucking out, basically, and expanding onto a farm, and getting my 2 to 5 acres, which is what I was looking for. But it also happens to be a centre for regenerative agriculture. And because my background meant that I was really interested in conservation and helping educate everyone, as in whether it's tiny tots all the way up to 80-year-olds. I mean, when I say educate, I think it's always a two-way thing. I'm learning just as much as I go along. But being able to connect people with their food, but also with the ecology surrounding the growing space. So recognizing how important looking after our birds, our insects, our mammals, small mammals, to actually producing our own food.
So you're producing a real wide variety of vegetables and fruit soon with your tree planting, with your agroforestry project. And people get a box of that each month. Now, I imagine for busy mums or some people, they won't get to contribute, but also you invite people as part of the growing. They might want to come and get involved, don't you? How does that work?
So the main part of it, as I said, the main part of it is this sort of this concept of consuming in a slightly different way by paying a fixed amount for a variable amount of produce, and getting your veg box at this time of year might be really plentiful, but that come February, March, you might be coming to pick up a bag of salad and a few leeks. But it's amazing how adaptable people are, and in buying in that way, we sort of compare our costs every year with the likes of, you know, a sort of a regular veg box like a Navel and Cole or a Riverford. And I think in consuming in that way, our customers generally make a saving of about £200 a year. So
I mean, it is amazing for those that aren't aware. I mean, I do an Abel and Cole box, although I am switching to a local CSA soon, when they'll take me. And I mean, I pay £28 for a large veg box each week, and you're talking about £30 a month, which really does make it affordable for a lot wider people, and takes away this idea that organic has to be elite. Now, I think also, just to tap in there, that I think a lot of people, certainly who my patients, they have no idea that the majority of their fruit and veg, well, certainly fruit, 90% is imported in this country, and a lot of it is produced with chemicals to get rid of the pests and to promote growth. But you're growing in a very different way. Can you help understand, you know, what that is, you know, what that method of growing is?
Our agroforestry project is a really good example of what we're trying to do. You know, a lot of the varieties that we would have had access to, let's say 80 years ago, they're kind of getting narrower and narrower. And the reason that they're getting narrower and narrower, a multitude of reasons, but one of them is that they need to be able to survive the transportation and sitting on a shelf for a while, because in our normal kind of consumer habits, that's what happens. Because we're able to harvest on the same day that people come and collect their boxes or we deliver, because we're so local, it gives us the benefit of not having to choose stuff that has tough skins or that can kind of last for that length of time. So things like fennel, for instance, you don't just get the fennel bulb, you get all the beautiful fronds with it, which are totally edible and is extra food. Because actually those look really beautiful for about 2.5 days, and that's why you don't see them on the supermarket shelves, because those fronds are going to go off and they're just going to start drooping and not looking very good, and so you just don't have access to them. With our agroforestry scheme, I'm super excited about that, because we've got one of our founders is also happens to be an apple expert, so she spent weeks and months delving into how we could have an agroforestry project. So planting trees, we want to try and bring biodiversity and insect life and bird life right next to our growing area. But we also want to tell a bit of a story about fruiting trees, apples in particular. So for most of us, we would, maybe know like 5 varieties of apples, or what we're kind of used to seeing on the shelves and having access to. But there are actually hundreds and hundreds of apple varieties, and they're all ready to harvest at different times. So actually by choosing apple, we've actually designed our agroforestry project with the aim of having a different apple variety every single week, so extending the growing season. And that's not just exciting because you've got obviously the diversity and different sorts of apples, different tastes, different looks, different sizes, but you also, by extending the growing season, you don't have to refrigerate, so you don't need to kind of use up all that carbon trying to keep stuff cool. You could have apples for 3-4 months of the year without ever having to store anything. And then the later varieties are actually the better ones to store anyway. They're the ones that naturally are sort of more storable, so you could choose to store if you wanted and even extend that season more. But this sense that we have to rely on imported fruit, yes, of course, to have more variety, we are used to that, but actually there's a lot of fruit that we can provide in the UK that damson season at the moment, the plums and the apples at the moment are absolutely phenomenal. But we're also having a lot of wasted orchards, so actually hopefully by growing in that way, by giving our customers a different apple every week, suddenly you realize what you potentially could have access to. And some of them, like my favorite, the little Spartan, it's about, I've got really I've been doing the tomatoes, so my hands are this is not like being on an outnet live. Sorry, didn't have time to deal with that. But anyway, the Spartan is about this big, bright red, and it's like the tastiest snack you could possibly imagine. And when you especially if you're watching kids eating apples and throwing half of it away because they're just too big for them, and maybe they don't like the taste of that particular one, the little Spartan, there's no waste there.
Yeah, so I've just seen that new McDonald Farms just joined. I was down there last week. They're a regenerative egg and chicken farmer, and they're just about to start their agroforestry project for their chickens that they move every day. Really inspiring. And for those that don't understand what agroforestry is, it's a method, it's a farming method or system where you have rows of fruit trees, and in between you might be growing grain or you might be growing vegetables, and then you're rotating those crops in those strips in between, and you're getting the benefit of what the trees bring to the ground and what the ground brings to those trees as well. And it's a kind of a system that works a lot better. I saw the Wakelings agroforestry project, which is the oldest one in this country. Totally inspiring. It's so beautiful. The biodiversity was really amazing. And I think it's really interesting, this idea of seasonal produce. Like I think we've really lost touch. The health benefit of eating seasonal is just, and things traveling shorter is not only does it maintain more nutrition, not only are we more exposed to the local microbiome of where it's grown, so there's bacteria in the soil that it's grown in that impacts our own and instructs our own immunity and boosts our own microbiome, but also it's just flavor. Like I am totally bowled over since I've transitioned to this way of eating, of like, oh my goodness, I don't feel I've ever tasted a tomato till I started eating local grown tomatoes. And the same with apples, actually. You know, we have a local greengrocer that has loads and loads of varieties. And again, I was just ignorant. You know, 5 years ago, I thought there were just 4 types of apple. I had no idea the diversity and the flavour and the taste and the excitement. And so it's really exciting. I would be really interested. Yes, yes. So it is also, it maintains its nutrition. You know, those kind of organic blueberries that were picked in Peru, you know, the moment they come off the you know, the bush, they're losing their vitamin C and losing some of their other nutrients, you know, until they get to us. So, you know, actually the other advantage with is the nutrient density.
Yeah.
So that again?
With sweet corn, I noticed it with our sweet corn recently. So we were harvesting sweet corn a couple of weeks ago, and on the first day, so someone asked me, what do I do with my sweet corn? And what they meant was, what kind of recipe should I use? And I just said, doesn't matter what you do with it, but eat it today. Eat one of them today and one of them in 3 days' time, and tell me what you think. And basically the first day, sweet corn, the color is really almost like, it's really thin, and it's like a sweetness almost mixed with like a taste of grass. It's got a really lovely flavor to it. And then 3 days later, it's not that it's not delicious, it is, because obviously it's been, you know, grown in a really good way, but the kernel suddenly has toughened up a little bit. There must have been a chemical change in that time, because the sugars are just much sort of sweeter, you know, what we envisage as a sort of sweet corn taste, but day completely different. That, you know, it's a completely different thing. So we've just become so used to having something. That's why I think quite a lot of time when, you know, people have put stuff in the kitchen garden, they smell it, bring them right back to maybe like a grandparent or something. But it's because it's got a perfume on it at that point in time, and the nutrient density is so high that it literally it makes you want to eat it there on the spot. And 3 days later, it changed. It's still good, but it's changed. So imagine that 2 weeks on.
So we've got lots of people agreeing to you. Anna Rossiter said, yes, the sweet one was so delicious. I ate the evening I collected it. And the guys from New McDonald are also saying, just eating raspberry straight from the can. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would just love to hear from you, I think also for me, one of the things that drive illness is just a lack of community and a sense, you know, losing that sense of belonging. And for me, food does something more than just feed our bodies. It's this real potent thing that gathers us as families around the table. But I think also starting to grow buy from local producers, I feel I belong, and it's giving me such a sense, just such a beautiful sense of belonging to the ground and to people and to community. Now you see that in what you're doing. Just tell me a little bit about the community part for you. Oh, I can't hear you. Here we go.
So that bit's been a real surprise. I mean, not that I didn't want. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You broke off.
So windy here. I think like everything. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, okay. I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you.
Me still? I don't think I. Can you hear me? Not sure whether to keep talking.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, at the beginning, I wanted it to be all about that didn't really realize, especially with our volunteers. We've had volunteers that are helping us out really right from the start, and I would say most people kind of start off maybe with a sense of wanting to come and learn how to grow things, wanting to learn more about things, or wanting to be outdoors and do the outdoors, and those are all really great reasons to come and sort of help out on a CSA. But what happens is really interesting. I think by the end of it, like, you know, keep coming for a year or so, it's about each other, as in it's about the relationship that you make, and take something completely different from the experience. For me personally, I used to work, before I did this, I worked in travel. So, and I traveled a lot as a child, and you know, it's one of the things that I miss. And I travel every Thursday. I've got my sort of group of volunteers. They have lived all around the world. Some have not lived all around the world, but lived locally. It's like soul food. I basically travel. We talk about, you know, past experiences, current experiences. We share ideas. We get to know each other, and it's amazing comes along, because there's no sort of, we had to prescribe a little bit over COVID vis-a-vis like arrival time. But normally we would just say, turn up if you've got time, don't turn up if you don't want to. You know, there's no obligation. And so what that means is that people can dip in and out of it. And actually, Anna, who was on before, you know, there was a point during COVID where actually it worked really with working from home and stuff. And so that worked out, and she was able to get a bit of time outside and then go back into the office. People who, in fact, I've got one woman recently who's been coming to volunteer for about a year and has become a really good friend over time. And she was about to start a new job, having you know, had young children, and so going back place. And one of the she insisted on for her new job was that, you know, her volunteer day was her day off. So she's built it into her life. And I just, sense of community. We used to get it on a regular basis, and it doesn't take, sometimes it just takes 15 minutes of interaction, but I think it's something we really need. And it's helpful if it's close to the soil. I think just the sounds of nature are, you know, there isn't for us, but I think we all know intrinsically we feel better for it. About that a lot in your sort of five. I remember, I mean, that connectivity being such an important one for health. And I've definitely noticed it with all of us.
I think the science is coming around, you know, proving connection to nature. We now have something called nature deficit disorder, and we are starting to understand what's happening with our neurotransmitters and at a molecular level when we get in touch with nature. And it's one of these things where often nature's just catching up with ancient practice. Now, the Chippy Larder has brought up some questions that are deeply passionate to my own heart, having worked in the inner city for many, many years and in some of the poorest parts of the world. He's asking, you know, how do we make this accessible to everybody? Like, if everybody had the choice, of course they would eat better. Like, but people have got financial restrictions, and certainly when I worked in the inner city, they can't get out into the countryside. Now, so there are these community-supported agricultural schemes in the city and outside of cities, popping up all over the place. My understanding is that if you Google community-supported agriculture for your country, you will get a list of where they are, and you can find out. And actually
collaborating with.
Oh, I've lost you again.
The CSA network does a really great map, actually, this to you. But another thing that, hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So if you go to network, actually, really good website to go on to, and they've got a map which will show you your local. But Chippy Larder makes a really, really good point, and she's doing both the Chippy Larder and the local Charberry Larder are doing amazing things for people who can't afford, as they say, can't afford access to locally grown food, as well as excess from supermarkets. And and there's a huge need for it, and actually it's meant that there's an even greater, there always has been a need, but I think the need has come to the forefront a lot more. And you know, and the sad thing is that a lot of the you know, the issues surrounding food you know, are to change at a much higher level, and you know, there is no externalization of cost often. So what is currently cheap food wouldn't be cheap food if those external costs were covered, but it leaves individuals who can't afford food in exactly the same thing, to rely on high sugar diets, which then have, you know, a cost later on down the line. So it's definitely an issue that needs to be talked about a lot. And I mean, what's been great in our local communities is the way, and I think that's what I would say potentially to people listening to this, is that if you have a choice, buy local and support local, and if you could, and then if individual extra mile or businesses are able to go that extra mile and collaborate with initiatives like local larders, then it's not that you're going to necessarily fulfill, answer, you know, all of these questions, but at least you'll go some way to helping support your local community, or at least have your eyes opened as to you know, what kind of food deprivation is on everybody's doorsteps, and even more so now people have lost their jobs.
And there's great organisations like
so if you haven't, you know, things and starting
and there's great organisations like I've been watching what Slow Food Brum have been doing in the inner city. Been amazing, you know, growing food and getting allotments in all sorts of places, tops of car parks and what have you, and it's really inspiring, because again, I'm so overwhelmed with how food just gathers people, not just nurturing and nourishing the body, but nurturing the mind, and you know, that ability to bring community together. It's just so powerful. And you know, it's just another project to watch. And it is a massive question, isn't it? Food poverty, right to what's going on in schools and what food's available and how we cooking, and
food waste. The dual food and food poverty, you know, how can you have 40% food waste and food poverty happening side by side? We're having it in our country, but an even wider wider problem is that you're also having, you know, food being grown for people to throw it away here, being grown in countries where, you know, you have desertification and you shouldn't even be growing those sorts of foods, where there's already a lack of water and the individuals living there are starving themselves. So it's kind of it's a much bigger question, and I'm not saying we've got all the answers, but I think done by thinking about thinking about food choices where we have that option, and maybe in doing so also supporting institutions that are helping with food poverty on your doorstep. And it's a lot more powerful, I think, when you're engaging with your own community about your own community's issues. It's not so this sort of concept of thinking global, because you know, we need to keep our heads in global, otherwise we'll have no sort of sovereignty vis-a-vis our choices as individuals. But also we've got the power to do something locally, so that's a good starting point. And the power of what we do 3 times a day is very powerful. Listen, it's been so wonderful. Just for people who are in the Cotswolds, just how do they connect with you and maybe ask you some questions through your Instagram? Is that all right? So I send them your way. I mean, and you can go get your fingers dirty with them. State of my fingers. I'm not on Instagram that much. I'm not in the office much, but we do have a volunteer session every Thursday and every Friday. It's a great excuse out onto the farm. Everybody's and I think, you know, even better way to ask your questions. But of course, if I get some questions, I will do my best to answer. But you'll have to bear.
And
juggling.
And then maybe if people look up, you know, their own CSAs, whether they're in America, Europe, the UK, they're all over. Maybe find out one in your area and hook up there. Maybe that's the first step, just looking for what's in your area. Listen, Emma, I've got to get back to clinic now and see my next patient. So it's been such a joy chatting. I'm with you next month, aren't I? So that's exciting. And I think tomorrow I'm going to be talking with Jenny from Gorse Hill Abbey dairy farm, who farm regeneratively, and we're going to be just hearing all about the milk story. So for those of you that want to kind of learn about that and what's really going on here in the UK, do join me then. But thank you so much, Em, and have a great rest of your afternoon. All right, bye.
You, Sam.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bye.
all right, bye everyone, bye.